In this season, we are looking at Bible verses that teach about the church so that we can be careful and be faithful as a part of the church of Jesus Christ. In this video, we are going to look at another key Bible verse that teaches about the church in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 15. This is Paul writing to Timothy. But in case I am delayed, I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and support of the truth. Here the church of the living God is called the household of God. So Paul is not telling Timothy the way he should behave in a certain building or a certain hall called the church, but it is about the way Timothy should manage the community who is the church, talking about things that must be done and methods that must be prioritized in this community, because otherwise this community ceases to be the church. This is important and we will talk more about it. Now, this community comprises of people who have become a family because of God. That's why it is called the household of God. What brings these people together to be a part of the household of God is their faith in God and their confession of Jesus being the Christ, the Son of the living God. In the face of persecution and idolatry, which is the temptation to exalt or prioritize any other things in this world above God. That is the very rock on which Jesus builds his church. This text also tells us that the church is the pillar and support of the truth. Now let's talk about the truth. The truth here refers to, firstly, a specific kind of truth which Paul immediately talks about in verse 16. We were reading verse 15. Now, verse 16, Paul talks about a common confession among the household of God. In this verse, the common confession is described as a great mystery of godliness focusing on Jesus. Let's read that. By common confession, great is the mystery of godliness. He who was revealed in the flesh was vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. This is obviously about and focused on Jesus. The right belief about Jesus must be upheld, or else it is not the church. Jesus must be confessed as the Christ, the Son of the living God, or else, again, it is not the church at all. And the truth, secondly, also refers to the words of the faith and the words of the sound doctrine that must be upheld in the household of God. This is in chapter 4, verse 6. We were reading the end of chapter 3 just now. Now let's enter chapter 4. Because right after the common confession at the end of chapter 3, Paul immediately talks about people falling away from the faith by paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons. This happens by means of the hypocrisy of liars. All these can be found in chapter 4, verses 1 to 5. Then as a contrast, Paul talks about the right kind of truth, which is the words of the faith and the words of the sound doctrine. This is written in chapter 4, verse 6. Now that we know what Paul means when he says the truth in chapter 3, verse 15, let us talk about what kind of relation the church has with the truth. The church is the pillar and support of the truth that we have just mentioned. The image that Paul is trying to associate here is the architecture of the Greek temples, where you have columns of pillar and a firm ground to hold the roof in place. You know, the church is not the truth, but it is likened to the pillars and the support that uphold the truth. The truth about Jesus, the truth about the faith, and the truth about the sound doctrine. So the church must uphold the truth, or it is not God's church at all. The church must teach sound doctrine, or it is not the church at all. It's kind of like salt. Without saltiness, it ceases to be. And at this point, we must be more precise about the church and the truth. It is like going to an eatery place. You ask the worker there, and then there's a difference between him telling you we have burgers on our menu versus we only serve burgers. Many churches certainly talk about the truth. The truth about Jesus, the truth about the faith, and the truth about sound doctrine, they have it. But very often, these churches also have many other things. In some cases, there's more, and in some cases, there's less. And sadly, also quite often there is also deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons in the so-called church. Paul says it clearly here, and I agree with him. When this happens, we know that the truth is not upheld. When the truth is not upheld, we know that there is no pillar and support of the truth. And we should realize that it is not the church of Jesus Christ, even though the signboard might say, this is a church. It may say, hey, but we still have some truth. We still talk about Jesus and we teach the Bible. That is exactly what the Israelite did. They worship God. At the same time, they either also worship other gods, or some of them, though did not worship other gods, but their life consistently misrepresent and distort God's teaching through the scripture. The consequence was the Spirit of God left the temple in Jerusalem, and God allowed the temple to be destroyed. Therefore, we must not be naive, thinking that it is fine as long as we have some truth in the menu. The truth of Jesus Christ, the truth of the faith, and the truth of the sound doctrine must be the only focus of the church. The church, being the pillar and support of the truth, must be known for its rigor and single-mindedness in ministering the truth. Many churches would minister the truth, but not many would do it rigorously and single-mindedly. They either don't do what they preach, or they modify the truth so that it better fits and justifies their behavior. Can you see this deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons that come by means of the hypocrisy of liars that Paul talks about in this process? First of all, they don't live by the truth. They say something and then they do something else. That's hypocrisy. They have to twist the truth here and there to suit their interests and their agendas. That's deception and doctrines of demons. So we must watch out for such signs in the church. Now we must ask, how do deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons make their way into the community of church? Paul says it is by means of the hypocrisy of liars. That is the exact opposite of the pillar and support of the truth. And how does that happen? It happens simply by appointing hypocrites and liars as ministers. Yes, it's that simple. It's the same as running a country, the leadership of the country. Elect the hypocritical and deceitful ministers, and you have an administration that will not serve the purpose of the country. And even if they ever do or say anything or something that is right or beneficial for the country, that is not because they are good. It is because they are deceitful and hypocritical. It is most destructive when deceptions are hidden behind partial truth. We know that. Now we know Paul is talking about the ministers because right before Paul talks about the church being the pillar and support of the truth, Paul has been teaching Timothy about identifying the right kind of overseers and deacons in chapter 3. These are people who serve in the church. In today's term, there are the pastors, the elders, and the elected board members. Now, to summarize chapter 3, Paul is saying that all of them must have a good reputation in their life, whether in marriage, in family, workplace, and society. Chapter 3, verse 6 specifically says that they must not be considered or they will fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. So be careful of considered leaders that cannot humble themselves to take low positions other than, they just can't take low positions. They must be the leaders. Be careful of them. Now, verse 7 says that their reputation outside the church is important too, so that they will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Now, can you see how these criteria are trying to filter, to identify the element of hypocrisy and deception in the appointment of leaders in the church? They're trying to keep those elements out by really looking into their integrity, how they're doing their life, how is their speech and their deeds. That's why we must take this seriously, because many churches has been ruined by such people being made leaders. Also in verse 2, Paul says the overseer or the pastor must be able to teach. This is so that the overseer will have what it takes to teach and lead the church to be the pillar and ground of the truth, rather than carelessly bringing in deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons and don't know about it, or purposefully twist around the truth according to their agendas. Now, this is why, as much as I agree that no one is perfect and everyone is but a sinner, But I also see the point why God teaches the church to elect and appoint pastors and ministers with integrity who know the truth and walk in the truth. And the pastor must be able to teach sound doctrine, because this is the only way to keep the church as the pillar and support of the truth. Or it is not church, or it is not the church. There is just no other way. Sometimes people justify that it is fine that leaders have problems, they are human too, because we are all sinners. But think about it this way. You will always find thieves in every culture. It is a sad truth, but we need to accept it while we work towards improvement. But it is a totally different issue when a thief is made the supreme leader or is holding key positions in the country. It's two totally different issues. At those times, we cannot just say, well, every culture has thieves, it's okay. Yes, we need to be gracious and apply godly love to even our enemies. We love them. But that doesn't include letting the thief keeping the supreme decision. That is not love. That is injustice. That is encouraging and condoning sin and wrongdoing. That is telling the thief that it's okay, we love how you ruin the people and destroy the country. Keep your position. Paul is telling Timothy to never let such a thing happen in the church. Now, if God sets strict requirements for leaders, we don't play God and override by trying to be even more merciful and gracious than God. That is deceitful and hypocritical. That is doctrines of demons. That cannot be. So when you go to any church, if you find the truth being upheld in words and in deeds, you have found the church. That is the household of God. Congratulations. If some other things like prosperity, wealth, entertainment, feeling good, or success in this life, if all these have taken the place of Jesus and sound doctrines, or what is preached is not done, then you have found deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons. Even when it is done in the name of the Lord, deception is still deception. That's why we imitate Christ. Jesus Christ, he led the disciples by example. He served lovingly. He is known to be truthful in words and deeds. He showed the world what it means to be the pillar and support of the truth. So may God help us all to be Christ-like in this season and beyond, that we will uphold the truth entrusted to us, and we will reject and uncover deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons.